Hey, good people. Welcome back. This week, we are going to be lecturing and talking a little bit about the school system and education within our society, and looking at things from a very different perspective, or I should say, an observational perspective, and asking some really tough questions about our education system. Now, our book kind of breaks things down a little bit in four specific areas. We'll be looking at the equal chance for success in our education system, looking at administrative challenges in our education system, how the United States compares internationally to other countries in education when we're looking at math, science, and reading. And then we're also going to just talk a little bit about the apparent crisis in higher education. All right, so let's buckle up and get ready to talk about the opportunity for equality and success with education. Now, when we talk about equality with success in education, I just want you to think about a few things. And our book kind of details them kind of nicely. It gives us a little bit of information in how we look at education. Before we begin talking about it, I just want to also make sure that I encourage you to watch all the videos and read the supplemental articles that I've posted in the module. But the first video that I want to ask you to watch is one that is coming from Crash Course, and it's looking at education based on a social conflict perspective, looking at it, again, that inequality in society. So when we're talking about education and the inequality in society, we kind of look at things, or I should say our book breaks things down by looking at the elite, I should say elitism in education based on the variables of race, gender, and also socioeconomic status. Now, when we're talking about it from a socioeconomic status, and we're looking at race and social class, some of the things we have to think about and ask ourselves about is this apparent gap in the educational system. And there is a video that I've attached, and I believe, and it is entitled School Voucher Programs. So I'm going to ask you to watch that, and I want you to think about the legitimacy, the fairness of a voucher program in the school system. When you're watching that video, watching the school voucher video, as well as a video on districting, I can't say that word, watching about the school districts, y'all. But it's a school district out in California looking at Malibu. But although these areas may seem distant from us, but I really want you to think about the concept that they're speaking about, and how do you see that applied within your own community when we're talking about education and having that equal opportunity for success, especially when it comes down to educating the elite, when we're looking at race and social class. When we talk about social class, it's that whole idea that when we think about how our parents may respond or how our parents may interact when it comes down to education, parents from middle class versus low income. We look at the whole idea of parental involvement, and is it an automatic type of thing of parental involvement? Is there encouragement? Is there discouragement in parental involvement? And those are some things truly, truly we got to think about. Maybe take a little step back in time and talk with your parents about how they saw, or were they encouraged or not encouraged to have some type of involvement with you as a student in your local school district. And I mean, going beyond just selling a fundraiser, but were they encouraged to go out and meet the teacher? Were they encouraged to be involved with a booster group? Was there an encouragement to see education as a partnership between the parents and the school? Or was it seen as adversarial? That the parents are saying one thing and teachers are saying another thing. What does that look like? And what did it look like for you, when you were growing up and going through elementary through high school? When we talk about educating the elite, looking at ethnic and racial issues relating to education, educating the elite, that's where that video comes in. When we talk about school districting out in Malibu, but also we want to be mindful of our history. When we're talking about racial and ethnic segregation in education, we have to go back, turn back the hands of time. And our book gives us a little bit of information on Brown versus the Board of Education, when we saw this federal legislation enacted that put an end to segregation in school, meaning that that the education should have been the same. It was that legislatively it should be the same across the board for all children in public school. But there's still an issue though, guys. There's an issue, especially when it comes down to whether you are looking at upper, middle, and low income families and the education that they have available to them, but also the quality of that education. When we talk about the quality of that education, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit in the chapter, the quality of the education, we have to look at the entire education system. We got to look at the quality of the teachers in the education system. And our book talks about that there's some issues, some perils that we have to consider when we think about our professionals that are in the classroom. Our book gives us information and statistics pointing out that the quality of the instruction in the classroom has decreased and continued to decrease since the 1960s. You know, that's generations, y'all. Generations of folks who have been experiencing a decrease in the quality of the education. And there's actually a statement in the textbook that says that the industry is mediocre. The industry meaning in preparing our teachers, that it's mediocre, that we are putting out there folks who may have an interest in being a teacher, but it's the quality of their work. Is it up to par that it is creating success in the classroom across the board with all students that are there? Some of the things that they talk about relative to the quality of the teaching and teachers in the classroom that may present as a hurdle in some areas. Definitely the one that's top on the page is the money. You know, that our teachers truly in some areas are not paid a fair wage. There are some teachers in some areas that make sufficient funds, and some in other areas, especially when we think about it based on your socioeconomic status, where the school is located, that the income or the salary range for those teachers may not be in that average range or in that normal range for educators. So we got to talk about money. We have to talk about burnout. You know, what goes on for some of our educators, the consistency of being on point every day in the classroom, of making sure that they are getting all the information and making it plain, making it simple, making it clear to all of the students in the classroom. Now, I need you to think about some things, y'all. Think about the dynamics of and the demographics of the classroom, maybe that you were in when you graduated from high school, even maybe going back to middle school. You know, the demographics in the classroom have shifted a lot to the point where sometimes we may see some classrooms with larger number of students, more students than teachers, maybe 28 to 30 students to one teacher, and no teacher's assistant, no teacher's aide. We may see some classrooms that have fewer students, and maybe those classes are the classrooms for our special education students. Now, I need y'all to be mindful of something, good people. When we talk about special education, we're not just referring to people who have an educational disability or learning disability. We are also referring to those students who are above the norm. So even those students who are in gifted and honors programs, they are also considered as special education because they are working outside of the realm of what is called a typically developed child. So if you have those that are struggling academically, and then you have those that are superior academically, both of those groups fall under special education. So we may see a difference in the classroom with that as well. So we go from this idea of how our children are set up for success to the quality of the education. But then I want to go back a little bit in the chapter and talk a little bit about some of the challenges that our schools face, that our administrators face when we're looking at how are we imparting quality education. Now there is a chart in the chapter, and the chart addresses information from an international perspective. The chart is labeled as the Program for International Student Assessment. And this chart gives us information and rankings of 45 countries and where we may fall, where all the countries fall when it comes down to the categories of science, math, and reading. Oh, when you all look at this chart, hey, eyes will be opened, and maybe some questions can start to format in your mind about what's going on within our education system. Unfortunately, in math, the United States in 2015 ranked number 39 out of 45 countries. That's in math. In science, the United States ranked 25 out of 45. And in reading, we were 23 out of 45. What is the problem? Why are we struggling? We are one of the greatest nations in the world. Why are we struggling like this educationally, academically? Questions we have to ask ourselves. What is the problem that our students are struggling with this? One of the things that the book talks about is the standardized testing, and the program that came down, No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind, again, a program that is supposed to focus on making sure that all children receive appropriate education. And that's a good concept, but we have to ask ourselves when we're talking about No Child Left Behind, what are some of the consequences that come down with this legislation, with this bill? We know that there is this whole idea that there's a forced standardized test. And I'm sure you all, if you're from Pennsylvania, you've participated in these standardized tests, the Keystone State exams. I think that's what they're called, the Keystone State exams that you have to take when you're in high school. And if you don't pass the exams, you don't graduate. How are we functioning around that test? I think it's safe to say, and I've heard this from several educators within the local school districts, that sometimes they have to teach to the test. So they are teaching the test, but not teaching the concepts so that you have this information that carries on from one year to the next. That presents a problem when we talk about how we are progressing academically. Another issue that we look at is that the results of these tests sometimes are broken down by race and socioeconomic status. When we think about how it's broken down in those categories, sometimes we can get an unfair distribution of what the results should be telling us. Another thing about this test is that the consequences, the negative consequences that some of the schools face if their students are not successful, I should say, if their average is not where it should be for student success in completing these exams. One way that we know that school districts face consequences is with funding. Some rewards are based on funding, but a lot of the consequences are based on funding as well. So all of this kind of melds into how are administratively, how are we dealing with and how are we addressing the issue of education within our society? When we're talking about education in our society, looking at the standardized tests, how we're tracking information, there's another video that I posted in the module that I want you to take a look at. And this is a video actually that was posted earlier in the semester when we were talking about poverty. But it's relative, of course, to education as well. And that video was all about how America's public school system keeps children in poverty. What is it that we're doing? How are we focusing on academics when sometimes socioeconomic status can kind of get in the way? Or I should say our focus on the socioeconomic status or social class gets in the way. So that's another issue, again, that we want to make sure that we address. Finally, in the chapter, what we want to look at is this idea or the concept of higher education. What's going on, y'all, with higher education, the crisis in higher ed? Some folks say that the crisis in the higher ed, that it occurs or that it's happening because of the increase in tuition in higher education. And yes, tuition indeed goes up almost every year, it seems. But when we think about the tuition, tuition increases, how does that impact higher education as a whole? Some of the things that the book talks about is that we look at, along with the cost of tuition, we look at the cost of benefits, healthcare benefits, and medical benefits for employees, and also making sure that we have insurance coverage for student athletes. We also look at the rising cost of technology. Technology changes every 5 minutes. So in order to be successful in the realm of higher education, colleges and universities have to have the technology and the resources available for students to be successful. Another thing that we look at is the rising cost of our building maintenance, keeping the buildings open, maintaining heating and air conditioning, making sure that the buildings are safe. all of that stuff. One of the things we also have to look at is some of the causes for students either stopping college or dropping out of college. What are your thoughts on that? Why are people starting a career or a journey in higher education only to drop out or to stop? Is it because of the cost of education? Or is it that they found a position where a degree is not necessary? And so higher education is an unnecessary option for a career path, for job placement. So again, these are some of the issues that I want you all to think about as you're reading through the chapter this week. Again, there are several videos that are posted. There is a very interesting article that I've shared with you all. The struggles with being, or the burdens of being, a Black teacher. Make sure you read over that. Again, there's the videos of how America's public schools are keeping children in poverty, the video on school districting. There we go. I got it out, y'all. The video on school vouchers. Make sure you check out all those videos, because it kind of adds to the information that you read about in the chapter. Definitely begin your video watching with the video from Crash Course on Schools and Society, looking at the education system from a social conflict perspective. All right, y'all. So that's the rundown of this chapter. We're talking about schools and education in our society. There are discussion questions posted for you, as well as assignments and chapter quiz that is available for you. Be mindful, good people, that sometimes with the chapter quiz, it may not be a full quiz, but it may be the unit quizzes within the chapter. All right, y'all. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you know where to find me, either on the phone or by email. I bid you love, peace, and bacon grease. Y'all have a good one.